Thank you for inviting us to share some of our work and to pick everyone's brains about ideas for translation. I'm here today with my collective members, Amelia, Angelica, Kush, and Kay. And we also have a few members of the collective in the audience as well. Hi, Zora. Hi, Zara. So we thought a really good place to start this conversation would be to tell you a little bit about how we got started and what has motivated this work. The context within which this work is situated is health and well-being research. And the core business of research is generating evidence to inform practice, policy, and hopefully result in some social change. And that's the goal that motivates all of us. And it's this shared motivation that's brought us together across various disciplines, institutions, and ages to tackle making evidence generation and knowledge creation more inclusive and better suited to the issues that we're trying to address. The backdrop within which we're working is a space which is really warming up to the idea of the end users of evidence, the so-called consumers, really needing to be a part of the process to make sure that what we're focusing on, who we're focusing on, and the sort of evidence that we're generating aligns with what is needed. And research is also moving towards incorporating lived experience as a legitimate and valuable knowledge source to be integrated with the more conventional data sources. And young people, those between the ages of 10 and 24 years, are being recognized more and more as experts in their own lives and whose lived experience is an essential part of evidence generation. In some corners, focusing on young people is sort of framed as a fantastic return on investment because of that triple dividend that you get, improving the health and well-being of young people themselves now, their health and well-being as adults in the future, and then, of course, future generations, their children, likely to end up happier and healthier. So there's lots of different arguments and perspectives as to why working with young people to generate evidence and change practice is critical. And in line with this thinking, there's lots of frameworks and guidelines and theories for engagement, which also means there's a lot of terminology out there, and it's a little bit confusing. What do we mean when we say co-design, co-research, engagement, youth partnerships? All of these things mean different things to different people. And so that's kind of an overview of the context within which this work started and is currently ongoing. And so C3, the core competencies for core research and essential reporting items, emerged in this space. And the idea really started taking shape a couple of years back. I was invited to join a project just after COVID. And the plan was to work with a national youth governance group, about 18 or 20 young people across the country living in every state and territory. And their role was to oversee the project and to direct its design and delivery. And the youth governance group had a leadership mechanism embedded within it right from the outset. The group was led by two co-chairs who met regularly with the research team. I think it was almost a weekly basis at the beginning of the project. So there were lots of opportunities for interaction and communication. And then as the project progressed, we got to know the young people a bit better. They became more acquainted with the ins and the outs of the project and also got to know us as the team. Everyone started getting clearer on what people wanted to focus on, and the roles started to sort of fall into place. And at that point, I piloted some knowledge exchange sessions to kind of build on all of the different experiences that the governance members and research team had. And then from that, we created interest-based working groups that each had a youth governance member co-leading it with a research team member. And these groups worked on, different elements of the research, depending on what people were most keen on and where their strengths and skills lie. Everything from creating recruitment assets to navigating the ethics process to running focus groups and doing interviews, engaging in the analysis, thinking through outputs for translation, event planning, you name it. And there were mini training sessions that accompanied each of these working group activities as needed, and they were just sort of organically developed. And I think this sort of process is something we're hearing more and more about in the research space. Young people playing more active roles in evidence generation and providing thought leadership and having access to professional development and capacity building. But I guess the question that kind of remained across all of this was, but what about the adults? What roles do we play in supporting these partnerships and engagement models in whatever form they take? What skills and knowledge do we need so that we can do this well? And I think for us, that seemed to be the missing piece in this equation. And I know in the youth sector, this might be slightly different. There is a huge focus on thinking about what roles adults play in supporting young people. But I think the roles that adults play and the goals are slightly different from, well-being and health research. In youth work, I think the goal is to empower and support young people to thrive, to reach their full potential by fostering personal, social, educational development. And it involves supporting young people to build the skills they need to manage relationships and to have a safe environment in which to operate. And so the adults in these spaces are mentors, allies. They support young people to navigate challenges, build skills. They sort of provide this scaffolding that's needed for young people to take the lead in transforming their own lives. I guess the question we're trying to answer here is, when you have these adult-youth partnerships, but where the shared goal is evidence generation, what does that look like? What does teamwork look like in that space, where there are huge power differences in skill sets, but the goal is still to work together? And I think one of the reasons we're here today is because there's so many competencies that overlap between those working in the youth space and those specifically working in knowledge co-production initiatives that, research sort of spearheads. And so what we want to do today is share what we're hearing so that you can weigh in on these, but keeping in mind that our goals are slightly different and our roles are slightly different. And then the other key piece that we're working on through C3 is thinking about how we make the evidence generation process, where there are these adult-youth partnerships in play, more transparent, and how do we bring more accountability to this space? And this reflection is actually happening across many research spaces. Our peers in the youth participatory research action space are actively thinking about very similar questions, particularly where YPAR or youth participatory action research is being used. And so this is a really, really cool time. This is our amazing collective. I have the privilege of working alongside 12 very passionate, super skilled, very kind and committed individuals. And I also feel like I was really lucky that I managed to partner with some very supportive and generous colleagues at the beginning who kind of helped make this whole thing a reality. So thank you, Zora, Stephanie, Angelica, and Peter. We started assembling the collective early last year. And of course, we have traditional labels for our official roles: investigators, team members, youth steering committee. But I think we prefer the collective because the way this is working and should be working is everyone's putting in ideas, everyone's putting in time, everyone's putting in effort, looking after one another and joining forces around a common goal. I feel like this is a real labor of love for everyone involved. For the actual work, we've approached this quest of ours in a very simple way. So we started speaking to the experts, young people and adults who've had some experience with either co-design, so working together on part of the research together, co-research, essentially working together as a team across the entire research process from start to finish, or where young people have come on board to provide a high-level oversight or input, as youth advisors, youth governance members, lived experience consultants, etc. We really wanted to learn from the rich experience and knowledge that is accumulating out there, and then sort of step back, reflect on what we're hearing, make sense of it, so that we can distill out ideas and share that so that we can all reach consensus around what competencies do adults need, and what we all agree that people should really describe when they're reporting on research or work that has happened in some sort of partnership with young people, just so that we can get a real sense of what happened and to what extent did young people actually lead this work. We started with interviews with youth and adult experts, mostly in Australia, but we have spoken to some adult researchers in North America and the UK. And our experts have come from a variety of fields and topic areas, ranging from mental health to gender studies, chronic disease care, youth justice, youth work, social work, you name it. In North America, there was definitely a strong network of researchers specializing in youth participatory action research, and we've been hearing some amazing work being done out there. In fact, the goal with YPAR is explicitly to result in some kind of social action. So there are great examples of where there's school-based work being done, where YPAR researchers, teachers, and students have come together to design and deliver a shared project. They make some tangible change within schools, either shaping learning outcomes or experiences or contributing to well-being in some way. So really, really cool stuff happening there. Across all of the interviews, experts have spoken to us about what their partnership models or engagement models look like. And then both adults and young people shared their motivations for doing this, coming together in these partnerships, and the things that made partnerships work or not work so well. And then we got them to specifically reflect on the skills, the knowledge, the attitudes, and the values that adults in these roles had or should have to make it work really well. And then our analysis working group went away and have been reflecting and discussing what we've heard over the past 5 months. So we've been reflecting for the past 5 months or so. And then we started coming up with a set of competencies and a list of reporting items. And we've put them together in a bit of a survey that we will be sharing not just with the people that we spoke to through interviews, but a wider set of people, hopefully including all of you, so that we can reach some consensus around what do adult researchers need to have and what we should all be reporting on. So what have we heard? So across the many young people and adult allies we've spoken to, mainly in the research space, but some also intersecting with the service space, is around what it takes to start, build, maintain, and then sort of wind up these projects where there are partnerships, both in terms of skills, but also the different roles that people play to create this sort of enabling environment for all of this to happen. And once again, the goal for these partnerships, in whatever form they take, is to work with young people to generate evidence so we can use that evidence to create change. And I'm going to provide a high level overview just to frame everything, but my colleagues on the collective will unpack specific areas in more detail as we progress through the presentation. So in terms of starting this work, we heard two main ways in which this typically is approached. There are adults who connect with young people at the idea phase, and this is before they've secured any project funding. They're setting the research agenda, they're thinking about what issues to focus on with young people. And these were mostly researchers that either had existing relationships with young people, either through prior work, or they were in organizations that had these mechanisms inbuilt, like they had a youth advisory council that was embedded within the institution, and different research groups can kind of consult them at various phases of their research ideas. And or these were individuals or groups that had access to funding through other sources that they could channel for this work. So they're doing all of this, still remunerating young people, but the project hasn't started. So they had those two sort of opportunities. Then there are those who engage with youth experts, whether that's youth co-researchers, co-designers, youth advisors, etc., after the project's been funded. And these are projects that are explicitly funded to include youth partnerships to shape the project. And these were more commonly where the adult researchers believe in youth partnerships and they have champions working alongside them that are committed to collaboration. And they recognize the complementary expertise that young people bring to the project, but didn't have the funding to sort of set that up right at the outset. Then to build these partnerships once everything has started off, having clear expectations, both adults and young people, is critical, and those have to be codified. Young people spoke about it being really useful to have a very clear terms of reference or an engagement protocol that kind of states the goal of the work, what roles everyone has, and what is expected of both adults and young people. And you'll hear more about that during the later part of the presentation. Next, adults are required to create a safe environment for people to operate within. So that's an inclusive space where young people feel supported, valued, and heard. And again, you'll hear more about that a bit later. Fun was something that adults raised quite a bit as well. The idea that while young people are coming on board for various reasons, ranging from wanting to learn something new or being passionately committed to seeing change and action in this space, regardless of the motivation, many of them are looking for an experience that they will enjoy and gain something out of. And so capacity building is a key part of this process. Everyone needs to be equipped to thrive in that role. And what we're learning, and so from what we're learning is that there's a lot of emphasis on training for young people. We've yet to hear anything about what capacity building is offered to adults to be effective partners, and whether young people have an opportunity to direct the training that adults receive. And this is something that the C3 Collective is hoping to contribute to in a small way. But you'll hear more about capacity building later in the presentation from my co-presenters as well. The next thing people talked about was how to maintain these partnerships. And most of these partnerships extend between 2 to 5 years. And so efforts need to go into maintaining them. And then there's an obvious ebb and flow of people, both adults and young people, moving in and out of roles. But maintaining the partnership structure is an essential part of engagement. And therefore, relationships are critical. Having research adjacent activities to help grow these relationships. People mention things like team dinners, having informal third spaces for communication, spending time hanging out, just, after formal business. All of these things help everyone to get to know each other, to learn things about each other, find common ground, feel connected, build trust. And that works especially well when people are there in person, but can also be done through online engagement as well. And you'll hear more about that too. Input and feedback mechanisms are essential. Young people are partnering with adults, and the main and most common reason for doing so is to share their experience and expertise to create change. They expect that what they give will be received, acknowledged, and actioned. And so proactively seeking out input, providing feedback on how this was integrated or not, and why is critical. And you'll hear more about that as well. We've also heard through our interviews that young people are interested in behind the scene updates. Those quiet periods when there's not a lot of active opportunities to engage, but things are sort of ticking along. They want to know what's happening. Some young people want context information. What hurdles did you face with your ethics application? Why are certain funding decisions made? Others appreciate more high-level feedback about progress, timelines. Knowing what to share requires knowing your team, clarity on roles and expectations, and good communication. And I think you'll hear about this from Kush and Amelia. And then flexibility to pivot, also needed to maintain relationships. This is part of being responsive, and it's a key skill required for these partnerships. Responsive to changing circumstances and needs of young people that you're partnering with, and I think Kush is going to talk about that. Responses to changes that result from ideas or expectations that young people have that you may not have anticipated or built into the project at the start. And these pivots require investment in time, resources, patience. I think a truly co-designed element of the project means that there's space for diverse contributions and inbuilt flexibility to accommodate these, and adults with the right skill set to manage these pivots and creativity to integrate them. And then that final piece, which is, the closing up of the project. This is kind of where all of that input that's been provided through the life cycle of the project results in some kind of action and hopefully creates some impact. This is where that evidence around a new program or evidence targeting a specific policy or practice change, etc., you get to see the fruits of all that labor. And young people as partners on that project are involved in the translation activities, sharing findings through conferences, workshops, building learning modules, briefing policymakers, engaging in advocacy, whatever it is. That's a key part of it. And then the piece where we, I think, have room to kind of build our work a bit is the what's next piece. So with most projects, once they end, that's it. There's very little continuity or opportunity to continue building on the work. And of course, the big reason for this is the funding ends. But what we've heard from young people, however, is that participating in one opportunity sometimes leads to other opportunities, either through taps on the shoulders or adult allies they've built relationships connecting them to other opportunities. And that's also appreciated. So that kind of sets up the whole architecture of the process and the context within which we're trying to unpack skills and roles. But across all of these, there's a few skills and values that we hear repeatedly across all the roles that adults have, regardless of the way in which they partner with young people. And this is having mutual respect for the expertise and skills that each individual holds, being committed to a shared goal and the process, and to valuing everyone's contributions, and really, really good communication in all its forms. And you'll hear all about that from our speakers. Being accommodating and inclusive of diverse perspectives, diverse needs, being genuine and trying to build trust, and not being afraid to get it wrong, being okay with things being messy, uncomfortable, uncertain, backtracking. I think that's one of the keys. So I might stop there. And before I hand over to our next speaker, I'd like to invite you to scan this QR code. As we said, we had a hidden agenda when we came for this webinar. We really want to share what we're hearing, but also get your ideas. And so we've put 3 questions for you in Mentimeter. What would be useful ways to translate competencies into practice? So we're hearing all this stuff about the skills, but what are great ways of putting that into practice? What should we be doing next? And then what can researchers learn from you as practitioners in the youth sector about youth partnerships, bearing in mind that our roles and goals are a little bit different? And then how can intersectoral collaboration create more space for youth leadership? How do we join forces, interdisciplinary, intersectoral forces, so that we can create structural change? So there's a broader enabling environment for young people to take up leadership. And so we invite you to pop your responses into Mentimeter while you listen to our speakers. There'll also be a Q&A section for other general questions if you need to. And now I'm going to invite my colleagues, starting with Kush, to reflect in more depth about some of the competencies that are really important.
Thank you, Jamila. I'm going to be talking about 2 roles, I guess, or competencies this afternoon. The first one being closing the loop, what you need to do and why it's important. And the second one being, we had a very clunky name, ensuring that processes and engagements is responsive to needs, or I would just term it responsiveness to young people's needs. So I think as a young person that's been involved in this space, there's a lot of issues that exist, including young people being repeatedly asked for their stories, which leads to consultation fatigue or consultation exhaustion, and consequently leads to disengagement when impact is unclear. That's where closing the loop becomes really important, because it demonstrates that the lived experience that they're sharing, it's important and it's essential for the project, rather than just being symbolic and a tokenistic thing you do along the way. But it also helps you build trust and has sustained engagement. However, communication at times can feel overwhelming for young people, because they have lives outside and they're not doing this full time. So I guess the one thing I would recommend to everyone is to think about what you can do differently and how you can improve. A couple of tricks I would suggest is recognize that communication must be inclusive, that not all young people communicate or engage in the same way, and participation is largely influenced by circumstances surrounding the young person's life. So working to strengthen the loop, make sure that you are clearly sure where inputs are going, offering different ways to stay connected, such as Miro boards staying open, or I don't know, Padlets, phone numbers being shared for young people that enjoy and that communicate that way. That would allow to reduce barriers to participation, but also allow people to step in and out, which is really important without penalty, because they're not full-time staff members or researchers, their advisors, and adults at times forget that young people are there because we want to be there and we want to share our voices, and we don't usually know the end all or be all. The second one is being responsive, and engagement doesn't look the same for many young people. Some prefer structured meetings, others prefer written submissions, and others engage through informal conversations. And recognizing that diversity and engagement styles is a strength when intentionally supported, and responsiveness is important for making sure that young people engage throughout the project from the very beginning to the end, rather than a responsiveness being relying on the goodwill of researchers or the organization that's working there. Um, what works well in engagement being respond in engagement with being responsive is having genuine opportunities to contribute across multiple stages, not just one-off consultations. Flexibilities in ways young people can show up that suits them. Again, I think I just wanted to re-emphasize that meeting young people where they are is quite important, and a lot of adults forget that from my personal lived experience. So what can we improve is creating a baseline of inclusion, clarity, and support, maintaining flexibility within structured frameworks, ensuring that roles, expectations, and impact pathways are transparent from the get-go, and also providing appropriate support, preparation, and debrief opportunities for participants. Acknowledging people's capacity it, to engage is shaped by their life circumstances. That's why we need to ensure that engagement processes are flexible, compassionate, and responsive to these realities. While closing the gap consistently allows you to make sure that input has influenced decisions and is working to bring sustained change. Now I'd like to invite Kay to talk about why inclusiveness in research and co-design is important.
Hi everyone. Um, I'm Kay. I thought I'd start off by letting you guys know I do come from a public health research background, and having had the privilege to consult on and co-design on many of those, I feel that's very important for what I'm about to talk about. So I've been on my fair share of like youth advisory groups and in these youth consultant spaces. And I've seen it done great. I've seen it done really poorly. And for me, the two most important things are regarding accessibility and how we are building capacity for young people. So, with regards to making spaces accessible and opportunities more visible, there are a couple of things I wanted to touch on. Firstly, physical access. I know I lived in a regional remote area for a period of time where there was very limited Wi Fi, and it was very difficult for us young people, even though there were so many who were passionate and already had the skills, just simply weren't exposed to the opportunities because, like, it just wasn't there. And also, from the perspective of working with people who experience disabilities, sometimes it is just not possible, whether for, say, chronic fatigue individuals, or people living with chronic fatigue, or those who have physical limitations that make it difficult to get to these more metropolitan and high density areas. It's I've seen it done really badly, but I've also seen it done really well. So, in terms of what I think adults need for skills in order to work with young people, um, being accommodating in providing flexible opportunities. So, having meetings that are hybrid, having meetings that are like work for the young people's schedules, and allocating burden to young people in a way that is in line with their capacity. And it is on the researcher to communicate what the expectations are of the project, which Kush spoke on, um, But when we are allocating these tasks, we do need to be sensitive that capacity is not fixed and different things happen, and to be conscious of different milestones, like someone going into their HSC may impact their capacity. Additionally, in terms of making opportunities more visible, I know it's very easy to, at least from a research perspective, think that social media is this perfect solves all solution, because so many people have it, but realistically, we are missing out on a lot of key stakeholders and groups that should be included and typically do come from more minority settings. For example, young people who are involved with the justice system may not have as much opportunity. Similar for young people who are First Nations and may not be like going through the social media platforms where we are putting these advertisements. So going out and physically going into those communities and delivering these opportunities and actually using our networks instead of thinking that, oh, social media will push it to where it needs to be, is so important, because we all know that the algorithm is flawed and tailored. And even if you think, oh, it's great, we've got so much diversity, you are probably still reaching a very narrow and very niche group that may not be representative. So if I could go on to building capacity, so this is something I'm particularly like passionate about, and I think is really important to take note of, especially if there's only one thing you take away from this. It's providing appropriate support and skill building for young people who we're starting to work with without assuming incompetence. And I'll explain a bit more. So, the burden of competence, assuming that the young people know what they're doing, it should not fall on the young person in order to already know everything. And there are many people who aren't able to access this space because they don't have experience. It is so important that we are firstly training them so that we know that everyone's on the same page. But while we're doing this, we need to be sensitive that it's not everyone's first time and everyone's going to have different needs. So that comes back to, we need to give them the appropriate supports and skill building without assuming that they are completely incompetent, because that is a very easy way to disengage young people, especially in research. I, again, reiterating, the burden of competence should not fall on the young person. They shouldn't have to come to you to be like, I need help learning, or I don't know what's going on. And skill development should be delivered in a way that both respects and values the expertise of young people. A way I've seen this done really well is through strengths-based co-design. And if you're unfamiliar with that model of practice, I would highly recommend having a look into it. It's exactly what it sounds like, focusing on the strengths and using those to propel forward what you're trying to do, and keeping in mind the goals and objectives that you're trying to do. Because no one's in this space just to say, how do I explain it? No one is in the youth space just to say, oh, everything is wrong. Everyone's going to be here to try and make it a better place, make it more accessible, give young people the skills and leadership abilities that they need. Like, yeah, I think it's pretty clear and so important. I'm going to tap Amelia on the shoulder and pass it on to her. She's going to continue to elaborate on some parts and bring her own amazing perspectives.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Kay. Yeah, so building on Kay's really, really critical points, especially around building capacity and inclusiveness. One way this can look like is actually co-defining roles with young people and what does their capacity look like currently, but also where do they want to build their capacity and grow their capacity as well. It can also look like being aware of young people's skills, where they are currently, what their interests are, and where they want to build to and what they want to gain out of the experience of being on the project as well. Um, and working together to see if there are different opportunities or different roles that young people can play, whether that might be leadership roles or support roles or co-authoring papers. You never know as the project goes on. But working with young people to make sure that the partnership is a collaboration and young people are getting benefit rather than just sharing their lived experience and informing the project. We really want to sit in that more collaborative and reflexive way of working together. Um, Co-defining roles can also look like really recognizing burden and inclusiveness. So, as much as we want to be really inclusive and give opportunities to every single young person in the project, so often, and I've had this in my lived experience as well, is that based on a young person's specific lived experience, they often get picked out for specific opportunities, and that can actually create an emotional labor and burden on young person to constantly repeat their lived experience, or can start to feel a little bit tokenistic, like they're only given those opportunities because of that lived experience. So we really want to make sure that when we're sharing opportunities with young people across the projects, that we're sharing it with everyone and really having that opt-in and opt-out capacity for young people to take on opportunities and also feel comfortable saying no to. We'll often have young people that are really, really passionate and really want to contribute and grow their skills as well. So we want to make sure that there is choice and there is that option for young people to actually say no or challenge perspectives as well. As part of that, it also like really stems into building trust and relationships with young people. And a real critical role of that is being consistent and being accountable. As the adults in the room, we do have a lot more power in these spaces and authority as the adults that are creating these projects and convening the young people. So we really want to be accountable to young people's feedback and ensure that we're creating a culture of open communication and being transparent and honest. And that looks like actually encouraging young people to challenge perspectives or name if something isn't working for them. Some of that can look like checking in with young people, just saying, hey, what can I do more of? Or does this actually make sense? Or is there something that we can change here that would be more accessible or work better for young people in the room? Uh, that's always definitely really appreciated and actually builds trust from the young people that you actually are taking on what they're saying and being responsive to that rather than hearing feedback saying, yeah, that's great, and then moving on doing nothing about it. Young people are really looking to see that consistent accountability from you in order to have trust in you. And when you do that, you're actually building a really, really great culture and really great partnership with young people. Part of this also looks like recognizing that young people have different experiences of what being genuine looks like. So, being authentic and being genuine can look like actually creating different ways for young people to communicate or participate within the project. It can also look like having activities at the start that sort of let young people transition into the meeting space or into talking about a project as well, that really lets them bring their full selves and bring their full energy to the project, but also creating space to acknowledge when young people might have low capacity or might have low energy and still creating ways for them to participate and to have their voices feel valued. As this goes on, it actually, builds that trust, builds that relationship, and can actually build leadership capacities in young people as well. And so I'm going to pass over to Angelica, who has some fantastic points in how we're building those leadership capacities for young people throughout these projects.
Thank you so much, Amelia, and also to everyone in this amazing collective. The 2 points that I guess I wanted to share here in terms of main ideas to think about are actually reflective of conversations and my own experience as well, being that young person aging out. And that I really wanted to point on the fact that this cohort is also part of the conversation as well. This group is also part of the group that needs to understand the competencies that it needs to develop to support young people in a meaningful way. And I say this because sometimes there's like this invisible line that exists of these in-between worlds in adult and youth partnerships. And where you're not quite the young person in the room, and yet you're not fully, with all this like expertise and leadership and all these formal titles. And or maybe you hit all of that at once. And this in-between world, you're also part of the conversation. So when you're slowly aging out or have aged out into this new bracket, there is actually a proximity to power that you also have within research partnerships. People might see you still as having proximity to young people, credibility. You have the memory of what it feels like to, I guess, exist in certain institutions, etc. And that's all true. But it also means with that, you develop the capacity as well to understand actually how to create supporting and enabling environments of other young people around you or in the work that you're doing. So there's a bit of recognition that yes, you get it transitioning out of youth, but also there's still a consideration of the power dynamics that you're now about to hold. And sometimes it doesn't feel like it all the time because you have that closeness. But what I think is really important is to the competency really here is to recognize that you need to stay genuinely in touch with youth perspectives, but in a way that is understanding of the emerging power dynamics that you hold. So not being performative in your relatability, which happens a lot. And I think a lot of us young people can relate to this in the call, because that performing relatability is a power dynamic in and of itself, but maintaining curious. Embracing cultural humility in the work that you do, to keep listening, even when you think that you already know, and also maintaining a level of self-awareness too, in understanding these power dynamics. You also will have to start to negotiate and advocate for space in a different way, because you are also taking up space in that regard of being the one who holds the power in the room. So this in-between world is something to be conscious about. And I guess I'm speaking more to that, to those who are, I guess, working or existing in that space at the moment. The second one that I wanted to reflect on is what we mean by safe environments and safe spaces. And I'm reluctant to provide a definition for that here because each and every young person and different cohorts of young people define safe in different ways. And it's important to one, avoid assumptions on what we classify as a safe space. This phrase gets used a lot, but a safe environment in the context of youth co-research or partnerships in research is not just simply having a room that doesn't have risk. We feel like the R word gets used a lot, and it can be naturally the focus that adult researchers have in the room. But safe environment isn't just that. It's a safe environment where young people can speak, disagree, not know freely, can change their mind, can be uncertain. The idea of a safe space is also not just created by intent alone, it's actually created by regular ongoing practice and regularly interrogating the language that we're using together in partnerships around safety as well. So having that kind of constant critical review and between what young people say is a safe and enabling environment for them, and also what happens in practice regularly throughout the journey of your partnerships with young people. So I would encourage in this point really that what the competency here is to understand that this applies to all parts of the opportunities that we provide for young people, and also that there's a level of respect and dignity that has to be upheld when it comes to creating and establishing safe enabling environments. And I intentionally use respect and dignity because just because young people are there's an avenue that's provided to them to lead in research doesn't necessarily mean that we've curated that in a way that where respect for one's culture, social being, etc., is upheld. And so, going beyond just that being on paper, but respect looks like, being transparent in how the inputs and outputs of a project is going to look like together. Respect is about following through, as some of my peers have mentioned. It means going back. It means upholding dignity and recognizing that young people's participation in research is sometimes not the most important thing to them right now as well. And sometimes we do forget that, just as it is for us, for adults too. And so, young people have a full life outside of a project just as just as, adults do. And so that has to be respected, and their experiences shouldn't just be extractive, but we respect their inherent worth, agency, and rights. And my question to this is that I pose is also, do you understand what the rights of young people are in research environments too? We won't answer that right now, but that's to ponder on. So hopefully those two thoughts give you also some further insights, as well as to what we feel like is needed in terms of competencies or understandings that you should have when you're engaging in research partnerships together with young people. And I'm now going to pass over to Jamita.
Thanks, guys. Thank you, Kush, Kay, Amelia, and Angelica. That was a great experience for me. So I'll just quickly do a 30-second summary because I know we're running out of time and we really want to hear from our audience. So I think some of the roles and tasks that we've all sort of touched on that adults engage are coordination. So, that requires good communication, progress updates, really closing that loop, and providing a diverse set of ways in which to do that, as Kush sort of highlighted, making it inclusive and mindful of varying needs and preferences. And Kay spoke about that as well. Training and learning. You talked about adults needing to provide opportunities for skill building, but really recognizing their own need to learn. Knowledge sharing should really underpin the partnership, and adults need to be self-aware, value youth expertise, and be able to draw out that youth expertise and have the humility and open-mindedness to receive the knowledge that young people hold. We talked about relationship nurturing as another thing that adults need to do, building relationships between themselves and young people, facilitating connection between young people themselves and also among the adults that they're working with. And part of that is everyone being clear of their roles, understanding expectations, and being flexible around that. Angelica, you've just talked about safe spaces, and talked about the importance of co-defining it, because what it means is has to be defined with the people working at that time in that space, rather than us making assumptions and not operating on intentions, but actually practicing it. So I think we've talked a lot about creating this enabling environment as the biggest role that adults play and what you kind of need for that. We didn't speak to you a lot today about reporting items, and maybe that's the conversation for another day. But we are working on a set of guidelines that talk about what sort of elements of the process people need to describe, so that youth reporting on these things is youth-led. There's transparency about what worked, what didn't work, so that we can continually learn. And the emphasis should really be on weaving in positionality. Who are the adults and young people in these partnerships, and how has that influenced the partnership and the project direction? So that might be a good place to wind up, and maybe jump onto Mentimeter and see what pearls of wisdom you've shared with us. I do invite the members of the collective that are in the audience to jump in and join us in answering questions. I know we've got Nyonika, Patience, and Zara with us. So, Angelica, I'll hand it back to you to field questions. And Emilio, if you're happy to bounce Mentimeter around.
Yeah, awesome. Well, with that, I invite people to either they can, I think, freely raise their hand actually or provide input in the chat. If you have a question or any thoughts or comments about the presentation so far. And I can see that we're starting to get the Mentimeter up with some things, which is really great. So I guess as people might have some questions percolating in their mind, feel free to put them in the chat, but I'm just going to read out some of the things that have been shared on the screen as well, which is really cool, around what would be useful ways to translate competencies into practice. We see that there's in-person training programs, tools, and the tools being really varied as well, which is really cool. A short practitioner's guide, maybe that magic can happen with collaboration across the many organizations and groups that work with young people, and also mentoring opportunities for agencies to assess throughout the engagement process. Are there any questions that anyone has at all? No, well, let's look at the next one. So, what can researchers learn from the youth sector about partnerships with young people? I love this one that's come up around youth workers, or actually, a lot of them are pretty much all focused on youth work, which is fantastic. And youth work, I used to be a youth worker, so I love seeing these be directed, I guess, because the youth sector is mainly youth workers too. So there's a big tradition on looking at values and engagement techniques that align with the research. And we talk about maximizing voluntary engagement, non-formal learning, and power shifting. And it's really important to recognize again that for a lot of researchers in the health space sometimes don't understand actually what principles sit behind different sectors. And I definitely know that being the case as being a past youth worker coming into like the research space as well and seeing the vast difference in understandings on these principles. So there's a lot to learn in that regard, as well as different models of practice, practical experiences in managing tensions around safety, autonomy, child-parent like relationships dynamics, and also carer rights too. And that youth work is also really dialogical. I almost couldn't pronounce that word, but dialogical. So, finding ways to like understand different perspectives too. And yeah, if anyone has any comments or thoughts on that, feel free to jump in. I think Dee?
I would like, yeah, that's where I kind of like to pick up is like, because obviously, like, you guys have been involved in these different programs. Some of you have maybe been peer mentors or youth workers in your own right. And I'd like to get that sense because I've been in research environments, I've been in youth work environments, I've been in youth work environments working with researchers, which of sometimes isn't the easiest thing. And I was like, how do you guys find it? Like, do you find that those more sort of traditional youth worky things of making it fun, being relational, like, do you find that that is what like it's almost like trying to lift some of that best practice from there and putting it into that space is what would be quite exciting, or have you maybe got a different perspective in that?
I have some initial thoughts. I know some of my peers definitely will. The word that you used there that really stood out to me was like, making things fun. And I know that fun has been talked about a lot, but also recognizing that these relationships can be like just messy and embracing that. And there's a lot of learnings that I think from youth work practice on that and what fun actually looks like. And that fun can happen in different stages is really important. Like I had a recent experience recently actually supporting a young person who was doing the ethics process of at a university and like trying to lead that. Now, to a lot of researchers, the ethics process is long, to say the least. Very important, but long, and can be defined as boring. But to them, they actually found the whole thing really exciting. And they really were interested. They had all these questions. They just wanted to understand what that process looked like and talk about that a bit more openly. And so when we talk about like partnerships and we talk about the different parts of research that we're involved in partnership together. We again, if it wasn't for the fact that this young person brought that up, that like, hey, actually, I want this to be explained. I'm actually enjoying understanding the technicalities of this and understanding ethics better. That was their version of a little bit of like fun, which to someone else might not be. But I guess in terms of the youth sector, the youth work sector, there's so much, and I think there's so many resources that I think the youth sector can provide to the research space and different research fields too, not just health research, but other areas of research. That would be super, super appreciated. Yeah, I hope that answers the question. Do any of the collective have any other thoughts?
Yeah, happy to jump on. Hi everyone, Nayanika here, Nayanika speaking. Nice to see you, Dean, as well. Love the question. I guess my answer is very lawyerly. It depends, is my answer. Because I think, as everyone said, it really comes down to the group of people or the young person you're working with as well. In my personal experience, both being as someone doing a lot of the support as someone in a research task or sometimes doing the research or in other contexts, working with young people, I think it comes down to what that young person needs at that point in time. And the other thing is also a young person's need across a project will change and evolve at different stages, you might need more of that fun element, but at another stage, you might need things to be a bit, cookie cutter, straight, a bit serious, and the young person might benefit from that. And I think the best way to do that is just to keep the conversation open at all times, and just be open to understanding that things evolve. It's like any relationship you have with a parent, a friend, a child, a partner, that will evolve. It looks, it's like talking to me before my 10 a.m. coffee sometimes. I'm just not going to be super chummy sometimes. And at 2 p.m., I'm super happy after lunch. That whole experience throughout the day for me changes. And I think it's the same thing working through research as well. You go through different things, you form different relationships as well. And I think sometimes we forget that in a research project, people are not just providing input, they have their own lives as well outside of that project. And as much as we want to, think of young people as monolithic experiences who come in and like just provide you all of these insights, they've got 5,000 things going on. And sometimes they don't have labels or they don't have words to describe what's going on. So I think there's that added challenge of, trying to process language for their personal experience as well. And you're trying to then get them to do these amazing research things. And it's like, whoa, 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 hold on. I don't know how to categorize and compartmentalize. And I think that's where adults as researchers really, or even support persons play a critical role, which is helping them understand that there is language that exists out there to ask for what sort of experience needs you have as well. So if you want things to just be black and white, just tell me what I need to do and I need to get out, that's helpful. And sometimes if you're like, well, I actually need a little bit more of cushioning and I need things to be padded a little more, that's completely fine. And then that brings a third piece of making sure that when young people ask you for that support of how they want it, you take the sort of trifecta of shame, guilt, and embarrassment out of that request. Because asking for that request is not easy. People don't like expressing their needs. It's probably one of the hardest things as adults to do as well. And so I think when you're the adult and the researcher, in that context, it's important you take those feelings and that experience away as well when they do reach out, and provide them that reassurance. But if collective has more thoughts, passing it back on to them.
I think we might have reached time actually. Is that the case? Yep. So I think I might maybe pass over to Jamita to wrap up, or Dee.
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 Yeah, I'll wrap up and I'll just what Nyonika was saying was just so perfect as well about that idea of always trying to meet young people where they're at and work out what specific needs they have and the evolving needs that they have. I think it's a very good sort of space to end on, a good thought to end on. So I just want to thank the whole C3 Collective for their work and for helping us to put on this event. I thought it was fantastic. I learned a lot, and I'm really excited to see what the team comes up with their outputs and going forward. But I suppose that is us at our end. So thank you very much. We will hopefully see you at another AAC event very soon. So thank you guys. All the best. See you later.